So as I was talking to Mark, we're about to enter a disruptive change in our life. Not only is the technological change, it's going to change the way we live our life. So this is important. And it's very important to have this transition in a safe way. That's why we need to start a dialogue, because this is really important once we enter the life of autonomous vehicle where software will be in charge of our lives. Safety and security is really, really important for us, and that's why we want to start a dialogue around it. That's number one. Second, as a part of our dialogue, we also do this podcast. How many of you watch our podcast? Can you show hands? That hurts. All right, so feel free to log onto our channel. We have it not only in YouTube, we have it in Anchor, in iTunes, in Spotify, and all over the places. So the second part of the mission, why we do this meetup and the podcast, is we want to build a community. We've seen the power of community, what beautiful things are achievable when we build a community. So I'm gonna give you an example here. This is a question to you. This is an image. Archaeologists discovered this weapon, which is about 29,000 years old from the hills of Latin America. So it's almost carefully similar to something that we use today. Can anybody tell me what that is?
Bottle opener.
Bottle opener. Okay, any second guess?
Knife.
Sorry?
A knife.
A knife? Oh, all right, sorry?
Axe.
Sorry? An axe. I was going toward something looks very similar. A mouse. You know, the size of a human palm didn't quite change, so here we have it. Now, the similarity is really obvious. Now, what I'm trying to ask you is, do you see any difference, a major difference in terms of the manufacturing process of these two things? Any guess? I mean, one could manufacture such a weapon from the nature, the other is not. But what is the main difference? Functionality in the manufacturing process.
Yeah.
So we're automotive, safety, process is important. Yes, we're getting there. So what I'm trying to say is that weapon over there, one person can single-handedly craft the weapon from the nature. And you have one equipment. There is not a single person in this planet Earth today who can say that he can make a mouse by himself from the nature. There's not a single company, probably, who can say that we can make a mouse without external suppliers. And it is not an exaggeration to say there's probably no country who can say that we can make a mouse without our external support. Probably the assembly code was written in the US, the wires and plastic was made in China, and probably it was assembled somewhere in India, who knows. So we're living in a global environment, and without collaborating, we can literally do nothing. When it comes to automotive, you have one vehicle manufactured by the OEMs. When it comes to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, there are about 3,000 companies involved behind one vehicle. So here, in today's world, we have literally no other option but to collaborate to do our stuff. So let's unlock the superpower of collaboration. This is the second thing. And before I move on, I want to say one thing I've never found anything better than this word, South African word, Ubuntu. I am because we are, to emphasize the spirit of collaborating. Now, finally, the third mission is for you to give you tons of nerdgasm. So let's make it a very, very stimulating session. We don't want to have a monologue from our speakers. Our style is very, very interactive. So I have spoken to the speakers. You can feel free to ask questions during the talk, whatever you want to. We want to have a dialogue, not a monologue. With that said, Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Rinat Amos. So, Rinat, I will do a short introduction about you. I've written it down. So Rinat is working as a project lead at BMW Group. I don't have to introduce BMW, you all know. His former position, he was a software architect and electrical specialist. And he is involved in architectural development in powertrains and the AUTOSAR rollout for BMW, including the process and the methodologies. In his current position, he is the driver of the AUTOSAR consortium on behalf of BMW. So he's literally our AUTOSAR man. And I'm really looking forward to it. Besides all these beautiful, amazing professional experiences, the reason I admire Rinat is you're really passionate about AUTOSAR.
Absolutely.
You love AUTOSAR, and this is something really admiring. So, ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Rinat Amos.
So, thanks for having me today. I think we met with the Matrickz company like 2 months ago, so they joined the AUTOSAR consortium. Thanks for joining. I think you talked about communities. There's one community which was established in 2003 that where BMW was kind of main driver to say we don't want to build systems from the start. We have to reuse things. We have to create a good ecosystem around our EE architectures. And with that, I think a lot of responsibility came up and a lot of technologies we already included in this standard. And I think for the future, the challenges, what you also mentioned, is definitely not less interesting for us. So let's take the German phrase, a little bit defensive on that. So we have to be conscious about what we really would like to drive in automated driving, for example. And therefore, I would like to give you a snapshot on AUTOSAR. In half an hour, I don't think I have too much time to give you a lot of details, but I have also some deeper stuff on security, on safety level. You can be thrilled on that. And let's just go to the organization. So AUTOSAR is not an usual standardization organization. It's more the industrialization of a standard. So what we usually do is we kind of use an ISO standard or something that is really demanded by more than one OEM and put that to the series projects. We sometimes have lifetime or life cycle times up to half a year. So that means we need to be present with the requirements, and half a year later we get the same stuff from the standard to the series. This makes us this gives us a lot of pressure in the standard and also in the collaboration with the core partners. The real benefit is that we kind of bound suppliers and the OEMs in one community. The core partners, which are huge companies, also are driving this project, and we try to really create this ecosystem for us that we have the right suppliers in the right place, in the right time, and the important thing is with the right technology. So we early take the chance to go to the standard and say, for example, save time is something very important for us for automated driving. We don't need only a time base for Ethernet. It must be also safe and secure. Next step is secure. We just start with safe. So this is the way we approach it, and then our suppliers are in the same ecosystem and we can directly start with serious development. This is the real benefit out of it, and you don't have to wait longer times for bigger standards, as you know, to set it up in different countries and so on. So this is somehow the background. Which companies did we, there you go. This book, yeah, better. We have 280 partners at the moment. It's split to the core partners on the left side, which are, as I said, kind of the are the driving units inside of this organization. We have strong commitment from premium partners from the middle part, and of course development partners, smaller companies with dedicated topics where they're really interested in. Also Matrickz is mentioned here on the right side, and we have the associate partners that are simply using the standard. I think maybe just to the round, who knows AUTOSAR? Because I won't go deeper on the organization. Okay, so I think that's the bigger part. We can also have a short chat after that, because as mentioned before, it's quite thrilling to work in such a community. For me, it's somehow also outside of my real company, but you're sitting together with 10 people coming from different perspectives, and you drive the same topic with a group atmosphere, with a team atmosphere, which is really interesting. What's coming next? I think like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a big challenge to ask ourselves what's the next step. Classic platform was kind of established. A lot of suppliers provided that. We had 60 to 80 ECUs running on that in the cars, and we were pretty happy, right? But at one point in time, you ask yourself, what's the next challenge? And we saw definitely in the topic of security, safety, reliability, a next step, but also a lot of challenges with regards to vehicle to X and big data to handle that. So classic platform would not make it per architecture. And we said we think of, you should take that call. New architectures, really like technical architectures, new processor architectures, GPUs that are really bound to onboard systems now, are creating for us a new challenge. And there the adaptive platform was for us the concrete answer. We had from the right side also infotainment systems, Linux-based systems. We did a kind of study group in AUTOSAR and invented something in the middle. We at least have an ASIL B running for this, and on the left side you see the classic platform. As I said, it's certified up to ASIL D by several suppliers, and I'm clicking one more time, now it's working. And the adaptive platform, we see that right now in first automated driving use cases is an accomplishment to the whole system, which means you don't build a safe system out of nothing, and not only with a classic platform. You need something with computing power. There we add the adaptive platform, and if they work in parallel or maybe in with a better architecture, you can address these requirements for automated driving easily. Not easily, but it's working. For us, it was the next step, and the real requirements also, of course, the classic platform is not outdated. If you adopt a feature in the system like IPsec, we have a new protocol coming in for the next release, it must work in the whole system. So we address the same requirements for the adaptive platform as for the classic platform, and we connect them together as the information which are service or signal-based oriented can flow from platform to platform. This is how a usual setup looks like. We have non-AUTOSAR systems inside of the car. On the other side, you have the adaptive platform, which is in the direction of body domain with gateway functionalities. You can connect vehicle to X use cases to this. It's Ethernet connected, and of course the classic platform provides you with with more safety related information, which are also approved from tool vendors and other suppliers. I think this So the main benefit of standards is, just one sentence to that because we can have another talk on this topic, the reusability of application software, that you don't create architecture over and over again. The same platform shall be used at least 3 lifetimes. If you start to do your platform from the scratch in the next project, you should ask yourself if you're driving the right platform, from my perspective. And the adaptive platform itself is somehow from left to right created in a specific architecture. I would just point to it. When you start an architecture, you always need, of course, some kind of hardware, but we don't standardize this in AUTOSAR. We rely on a so-called POSIX standard, PSE51, that's a subset of it, a set of interfaces, which is also compatible with a lot of POSIX supporting systems. You might know, now I need to be careful with products to mention, but there are some operating systems that already provide a kind of criticality that you really need. I think Linux is something we could think of, but we haven't seen Linux running for ASIL-related applications only. So it's usually built something on top. And then you ask yourself, how can I spawn a process? How can you start a scheduler? You start going to the top, you create an execution management, then you start to do a communication, you go to the left side, you pick a protocol you like. That's for us SAM-IP, and for others maybe DDS. You create a basic communication over Ethernet, and then you have a base standard types you can really reuse from the standard, and go to the right side where you have a plenty of automotive specific features. And this is also the benefit of AUTOSAR. We have automotive software experts that are really inside of this ecosystem for years. So they know the ISO, related ISO for diagnostics, for time synchronization, it's IEEE. For the platform health management is, of course, the ISO 26262, where we have a kind of watchdog, platform health monitoring possibilities. Identity access management is something very important for security, when you need to grant access for a file system. And then you go to the right, you need, of course, a kind of debug possibility for your data, which we're widely used is at the moment DLT from open source communities reworked. And cryptographic libraries are quite common, and I think this is one of the future standardization purpose we have as a common challenge. So we need the companies from the security area, from the banking fields, from where IT is really longer already in place, that we can trust them. So experience combining it with the security needs of automotive. You maybe ask yourself, where's the difference between gray and blue? That's the frequently asked question on this slide. We have the ARA adaptive application. We call that our middleware, which is kind of ARA is the middleware, and ARA.com is collecting all the services that are provided for the applications on top. You build here on top your application. It could be something for lane detection, for example, or something easier for body domain use cases, which is already implemented on other platforms. And then you connect it to a service provided by ARA.com, which could be from the area of diagnostics, network management, or update and configuration management. Or you bind it to a kind of library that can be used as an API here from the left side from another library for security or for safety, for example. So this is somehow the architecture, what you need to understand before setting up a platform. And this was really like in 4 or 5 minutes, and I hope it's deeper to understand, I think, in reading out specification, in looking on the demonstrator. We provide from the standard also code, which means we grant soon your partner to a Git repository and access, and you can simply build up everything what you can read in the specs and create a demonstrator out of it. Maybe we see there's something similar later. Yeah, yeah, good. I will dig deeper a little bit in the security and the safety area. I would start with the safety part because it's an older topic for automotive, and I think we can tell here more. When we ask ourselves what are the use cases for that, it's definitely one use case to go in the automotive driving area. So we split here the off-board and the onboard systems, and partly the processing power is distributed to systems we don't even see. We have to deal with services that are coming from another dimension we don't see. So, but what we can definitely steer is on the left side the perception or the trajectory planning. Those are typical applications for such an adaptive platform. And in between there are some phrases which are saying safety and security is really demanding for these use cases. On the one side you get updates which must be secure, and on the other side safety and security in onboard system is something you must monitor. And this is something how you can gain trust. I always hear people talking about safety and they say the word trust in the same sentence, but nobody can really answer what makes us a system trustworthy. And I think there's a gap of implementation and industrialization provide trustworthy systems. So we try to find an answer on that. How can we do that? So if we talk about trust, it's always somehow a system in background. And the most complex system, to be honest, I know is the human being, and because we can explain ourselves. And when you have to trust another human being, you ask yourself, is the person reliable? What means reliability for us? It's split somehow to 4 aspects. The one thing, you feel secure. If someone stands beside you who gives you the feeling to be secure as a system. Let's point out a human being is a complex system. On the other side, you feel safe yourself in the same time if you prepared yourself to be safe. And the availability is the precondition for all of it. It's somehow your health. Because if you are not healthy, you're not even there. From my perspective, the availability is the first thing we need to take care of before looking on safety, security, and our intelligence, which is based on know-how and maybe on experience. So that's a human being kind of, and if all these 4 factors are kind of complete, we feel ourselves like trusted and secure maybe a little bit more. So let's point out a little bit more in the topics of availability. I mentioned the topic of health. For me, it's we can't do anything of these things like being secure and safe if we are not available at all, if we are not healthy, if we have a flu, we get a medication, we are degrading somehow. And if we even are more influenced by that, we have to go to the hospital. That's our safe state, in fact. You feel safe there, right? at least nothing can happen to you. There's a doctor who's watching you. He's your platform health monitor somehow. On the secure side, you can also have the same. Maybe it's also unsecure in some ways, but inside of prison you have some walls around you. You don't interact at all, so you can, or you know your risk very early. This is the other possibility. That's the two possibilities you have as a human being to feel more secure. How can we do that for, where do you have to click? In this direction? Yeah, there you go. How can we kind of move that to the system approach? If we think of two processes that are interacting, they have maybe a sensor, they get information, they act on a specific thing, and have an actor in behind. And also those systems are having this difficulty to understand in which state are we at the moment moving. So I called this slide from fail safe to fail operational, because in safety we are quite good in being fail safe. I remember my times in serious projects, the best way to be on the safe side is just to decrease the acceleration and just to brake, and then you can do almost anything, right? But the point is the state in between. When we're degrading, there are a lot of steps in between. And the only possibility to identify that is to have a health indicator. So to say you are in a specific intermediate step that you can act on a drive, a comfort way, or in a safe or stop. So you're degrading in your system behavior. That's where I jump now more to the AUTOSAR specification, because we talk about health channels in platform health management. We have, thank you. We have seen this architecture picture before. I tried to explain it in 5 minutes. I hope you somehow get it. And then the safety parts are just with a kind of rectangle with a transparent one. And the platform health management is something which with the function cluster we observe the health of the whole system. So you get health indicators from different directions. Why are the other parts interesting for safety? I just sum it up. You need to schedule. That's always safety related. You need to communicate, end-to-end protection. I mean, all of you need have maybe seen the different profiles we have in AUTOSAR Classic. And time synchronization, as I mentioned, the Ethernet communication is not bound to time at the moment. It's packaged, and then you have to get a kind of library to start counting. And it must be a safe time, a synchronized safe time. The crypto library is somehow a good example, because the topic of software robustness is handled in both areas. We need a robust software. It means a lot of background, how we test it, how we provide coding guidelines, what kind of coding features do we really use, exception handling or not. So both aspects like safety and security are, with these demands, similar. And if you go on the right side, you need to know your safe state. Of course, your sensors must be safe, and your update and configuration management shouldn't split too much or touch too much your safety parts, because if you need to update them. So somehow this is very crucial, because if we need to be flexible, you get in one point in time to the situation that you touch an ASIL-B software component, which is certified before going to serious, and you don't want to touch it too much. So this is the difficulty in the update process at all. We are now in the step where it's going to be a little bit more detailed in the sense of architecture. The PHM I mentioned before is somehow the monitoring module of the whole safety system, where we also can indicate health, where we can have different approaches to supervise the application. I just explained the left side, it's the outside architecture, and then the right side is how a PHM is working. So the Platform Health Manager has connections, monitors the state manager, it monitors the application, and it demands a recovery action from the execution management. In case I degrade, I need to know what kind of recovery I can get. So maybe there is a function I can even call in case I'm in the specific mode, or I have a return value that is bound already or is static. This is a recovery action. This is somehow how we look from outside to the Platform Health Manager. The Platform Health Manager inside has different supervision possibilities: logical, alive supervision, and deadline supervision. Logical means it's like a scheduler in the past. You know which step comes after another, and you supervise that from different checkpoints. It's going too deep? It's okay? Okay. And then you have alive and deadline, which are more time-based. Means you calculate your time base, and then you ask yourself, get I a response on the alive or not? And I can do that once, two times, three times, and then I have also recovery action. So somehow it gives you the possibility to measure the way the health indicator can be observed. And the more health indicators you get, the better you are. So let's point maybe an example that's easier. You have this person, complex system, sitting inside a car, and he was with his friends outside. He had a beer and maybe two. And after that, you see that in your inside camera in his eyes. So maybe the health indicator of this person is not that good. You can compare that to the health indicator of your ECU and say, maybe we should go for another profile inside of our car because this guy shouldn't drive at all. So we can combine health indicators if you look outside of our ECU systems in future. And this makes us more safe if we go for automated driving from my perspective. Did you get that, or do you have questions until? Okay. Yeah?
Just go back to the
Okay. That's Klaus. we're sitting beside each other before.
So, without knowing this in detail, so are the platform health management, is it already extendable to the current platforms or for platform specific? So is the platform health management maybe? Let me know when I can.
So Klaus is very deep in safety.
Does it work? Yes? Okay. So is the platform health management mechanism in this version already, does it support platform-specific extensions for some health indications also from the lower level of the AUTOSAR ecosystem, like from the operating system or something else that I can add these health indications already right now to the platform health management indication level? Or?
Thing is, right, the platform health manager at the moment is not bound to any hardware on any operating system. What we say is there is a health channel and then a health indicator in a specific API. We expect that to come from a sensor, from an operating system, from a human being. It could be even a public API we could get from an insurance company. So because we have a not bound to any layer like operating system or hardware. Okay. An example of the health, thank you. As I mentioned before, there is alive, logical, and deadline. And there is an example how it could look like in code. So we have checkpoints to kind of access that from the application. You can log against it, you can implement against the checkpoints, and it's definitely extendable. On the right side, you see how the supervision really works. And it's a local supervision, a global supervision where we could think of a system. And the local supervision is really bound to logical supervision that are connecting checkpoints. And checkpoints are really seen in the code. So this is somehow the internal behavior of the PHM. This is the deepest level I would go today. I hope it gives you a little bit more understanding on that. I would bridge that now to security. Yes, please.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks.
With the terms reliability, availability, safety and security and so on, is for the health management, is there any priority among the terms? The health?
So, not defined yet. So it's quite simple to say, we are in the state that the platform health manager and monitor at the moment can say we can do everything on an onboard ECU, but we don't connect the health indicators and don't give them priorities at the moment. And this is for me, and this is a good question, as something like a next step, because we need now to combine 2-3 more ECUs and combine it to the offboard systems, and then create this overall system health indicator. So it's not prioritized yet.
So to advance this question, if you combine by this AUTOSAR interface various ECUs and functions, one should ask the question whether it is really possible to define generic priority among the terms and functions.
This is a configuration we could think of. So there's one thing to define something by API, which is bound inside of the code, like an interface you implement against it, and the other side to make it configurable. The point in standardization is, and we know that from the classic platform, the more requests you get to configuration, the more complex it gets. So you must still create a lean API for the application developer, and on the other side you need to create a configuration that it's extendable and generic. And that's the real challenge somehow. So I remember the classic platform with the ECUC. Every one of you guys who had ever configured an ECUC in classic, there are a lot of requirements bound to this, and this is a historical collection of all the requirements, and this is difficult to understand then if you jump on that later. Okay, thank you. We'll go back to the security bridge. I marked it yellow, and you see that there's some overlap, because in the safety area we kind of marked similar parts on the left side, and the security is providing us 2 possible function clusters. The one is very extensive, that's the crypto API at the moment, and because it combines a lot of aspects and a lot of requirements from security region. And the second part is bound to the crypto API really much. On the right side, only diagnostics is different, because security and service diagnostics are very connected. So if you bring your car to the dealer, you must have a basic diagnostics with a good security possibility to not interfere here from outside. So this is the only difference for safety. On safety level, you really say diagnostic and safety are not really connected to each other from the current point of view. And if you look on the requirements we found in the standardization, that's the left part, there are definitely directions for date and time. I'm starting from the lower part. Software robustness we talked already about, the date and time. Onboard communication, you must have a secure onboard communication for signal-based, but only also for services. And of course, certificates keys. There's a major, I think, demands from the security area, and I think there are standards from the IT technologies which can be reused here. Secure modes, the state manager we have in AUTOSAR must be secure, that you don't interfere as well in this direction. And the diagnostics I mentioned before, and privacy protection is something like the access management of specific roles, rights to overwrite things on the file system or not. So these were the basic things we could handle in the standardization. A security management system within an OEM or supplier has much more requirements. So we see also something which is going to really build up a car. You don't get this done inside of the standard because everybody here is kind of different. So there you need to draw a line somewhere. What efforts you do in the standard, in the community, and what parts you really demand from serious development. And for us, the crypto service manager is a central topic. We are working in standardization here for 2 years now. And we are combining here requirements coming from outside to typical automotive use cases, and it's really hard. So everyone who have seen the SEC group in AUTOSAR working, it's sometimes fun watching, but it's not fun participating in really getting output out of a meeting because there are so different opinions at the moment. On the other side, it's also challenging because we are driving things that might be referenced in a lot of serious development, and we can't wait. We can't wait for another standard here. We use the state of technology to reuse it for our series. We can't wait here for another long-term standard. The API on top is for the application developers. It must be lean. And this is the real difficulty in the crypto API because the subset of features, and that's a colorful picture I reused from the group itself, is really a package. The specification itself right now has more than 200 to 300 pages, and it combines a lot of requirements which we saw on the page before. And for us, the application, the adaptive application, would need a lean API, which kind of need also an inheritance behavior on the API side to provide all these features which you need in the isolated and trusted environment. Because those are, you remember the prison, the isolated environment, you feel secure in this phase. And if you get features to make you even more secure with certificates and really approved keys, you trust there on this level. And that's the real challenge here, to provide these guys, the adaptive applications, an API which is lean, but on the other hand also complex and providing the state-of-the-art security features. So everybody who is really into security in this room, or maybe outside, you are invited to join this group. It wouldn't make it bigger and maybe worse to standardize, but but we would need your feedback, and we really need your expertise on that to a little bit accelerate the automotive ideas here. On security side, so this is already, what's the difference in security? Because everybody is talking also about it, and AUTOSAR is providing you here already a part of an implementation, which is an API in future. And this is, for me right now, more helpful than discussing the processes and about the risks we don't even know. Starting with a measure in this way is giving you much more than just thinking about future and assuming what risks might come up and do I feel secure in my prison, or should I maybe create some nice windows on my walls and then they can see through it and I feel maybe unsecure, but I can also put some surveillance cameras outside and can observe them. And if I react in a good point in time, I maybe also feel more secure. So there are different ways to react on things. You don't have to build the biggest wall around you to feel secure. That's my point. Okay, next one. 2 more slides to the organization. AUTOSAR is working in releases. We release yearly, starting with this one in November. We are in a hot phase at the moment. Last change requests coming in, and we have classic, adaptive, and foundation. Foundation are protocols we can reuse for other systems, and there are also, if you feel one time the standardization work, that's why I like it. It has a lot of aspects that you don't see in your usual work, and which you know from your own company, because you get different cultures and one table on one technology with one frame, all compliance-wise fine. This is also something very special. Not everyone can say that, and you can work on real technologies. This is the organization. I will just jump over that. We put safety and security in a really leading position. That's one of our pillars of our organization. They are reviewing almost every change request we get. And you didn't say about the content how much I have to present. So the last slide I will really show is if you would really get a nice impression about the whole community, what we are doing, about partners that are presenting the state-of-the-art challenges. We have a nice event that's planned for start of March. It's in Lisbon, and we have a nice site there as well in the Nova University. We will talk about adaptive, about classic. There is a demonstrator running with a Pi car, which is kind of line detection of a Python-based car that where adaptive is running on it, and it's coming with the code, which is with the demonstrator. So I really would appreciate to maybe see some of your faces, there, and yeah, this would be my end of the presentation. I hope I gave you a little bit of a snapshot what for standardization means, not only saying safety, security, and trustworthy. For AUTOSAR, it means to provide an API that brings you into the industrialization part, really using it. It's my face.
There's some time for...
Okay. Perfect. We need here?
Do I need
Yes,
speak really loud? And then
it's just...
Or is it on?
It's on, perfect. When you showed this little health green diagram, then clearly you have some outcome matrix practically which you're observing, and I guess there had multiple parts which you just said. But do you intend to practically then create this feeling of safety by kind of making this data available to the user? Or do you rather envision that you have a little green light on top of that AV and you're like driving around and you know when the light goes red, you know it's not good, you know you're gonna leave the street, or like which
architecture, the user of interface is really kind of open how to use this information he gets. And I think that if you get this information as a clean interface with a good quality,
Excellent.
you can do everything what you like. You can put a green light and saying, I'm just informing, or you can do a calculation in background and really maybe changing the wheel, which is really hard with the ASIL-D requirements we have. But the point is that the technology is really open for such things.
But are you currently?
No, we don't. We won't, because it's very detailed in the use case already.
Yeah.
So what we will do is providing this hopefully clean interface to make the use cases possible.
Thanks, yes.
Some more. That's Roland, I know him.
Yeah. I find the idea of platform health indicators very interesting to be distributed maybe later on. And do you think it's a likely situation that you have distributed indicators coming from different sources, maybe from rate my driving skill number you can call or whatever? Do you have any ideas of maybe automated systems or off-board health indication maybe possible or needed in the future?
We can sketch some together, because I think asking this kind of question you already have maybe some ideas, because if you think of what you're driving with a car and you're coming home and the soon you are inside of your Wi-Fi, maybe other systems interact with you. Maybe Alexa knows something about you, right? You can maybe provide your health indicator to Alexa, and she can spawn any cloud service in background on that. So there's really a lot of possibilities if you know how trustworthy your system is. And in this case, the system is really inside of the car, and it provides you indication already. And this is what we will do in the standard. And as mentioned before, the use cases are really not bound at the moment on onboard system. I hope, Roland, it gets a little bit of the direction.
Acting a clear vision.
Okay, so I have a question. Can I do anything?
One second, Hassan, 1 second.
Now? Yes, works? Okay. So when it comes to autonomous vehicle, in my opinion, there are two aspects of safety. One is your system can have some faults and your safety is in danger due to the fault. And the second is your system does not have any fault, but somehow it fails to do what it is intended to do. That's why we have the safety of intended functionalities. So, exactly. What does AUTOSAR Adaptive provide to address this?
Yeah, so we didn't make up your mind on the SOTIF part, because from my perspective, there's right now on the ISO use case a lot of adaptation needed from the classic to adaptive, and maybe the SOTIF aspects are something 2021 related, but even for 2020, I guess we have a lot of things to do for end-to-end protection, to have PHM running. Maybe we think of something like redundancy concepts, because we see that classic and adaptive in the interaction itself, maybe we don't need for adaptive ASIL D at all, because it always runs with an ASIL D of classic. And this kind of challenges we see as a first step, but then also talking into safety in the SOTIF part. This might be something for 21, I guess.
2021.
2021.
Thank you. Any other question? Maybe a last question? Yes.
That's Peter.
Just
Those are real names, just by
The real names.
so we know each other. Nevertheless, a question about how to trust your safety or security argumentation. Is there some plan in AUTOSAR to have an available argumentation or something which could be reused in the development for using your architecture, the AUTOSAR architecture?
We have in the safety part 3 groups. The one is the mentioned end-to-end. The second one, which is more and more working on the PHM, with more concepts are coming to the PHM at the moment. And the third group is the safety architecture group that are planning to have a safety overview. We started with a safety concept, then we moved somehow to a safety plan, and then we said no, it's just an overview. So the point is that you don't really know your context, and if you think of safety element out of context, you need to describe a lot. And to describe all the use cases you have in the industry, it makes it simply unusable. So the architecture you need to provide is only an overview with major safety requirements. We can define that. But going more into the detail, we must leave something also to the serious development, to be honest. So one point in time, just to say.
It's only a platform.
Yeah, so reusable platform, that's it. Thanks for your time and also for the possibility. Thank you.
He's the founder and the principal partner of Hawk + Co., which is a global autonomous vehicle mobility consulting company serving from California, Amsterdam, and Paris. He is a UCLA graduate where he did his BA with heavy concentration in engineering. And what I really like, what I started with today is what he says, he's very passionate about technology, autonomous vehicle, law, policy, and all those. And what he says is the greatest step change in humanity since the Industrial Revolution is autonomous vehicle. So that's Mark, and together with Mark, we have Dr. Martin Adler, who is actually Mark's partner in Hawk + Co., and he is an economist. He advises the European Commission, OECD, national and municipal public bodies, and private enterprises like Nissan and Dropbox. He holds a research position at the VU University of Amsterdam, and he has earned a number of prizes for his scientific achievements, including International Transport and Economics Association and German Forum of Regional Sciences. So he's also an advisory body in International Advisory Board of La Marina de Valencia, and he works as well as a leader in the Placemaking Europe network. Pretty impressive profile. Besides their amazing profile, I really, really admire these two gentlemen because of their passion toward autonomous vehicle. And I'm really excited because we often, when you talk about especially safety, we often stumble when it comes to the legal issue. We're careful, we don't want to make a legal statement, but today we have these two gentlemen who's going to entertain us about this. Please big hand for Mark and Martin.
All right.
So here we are. Safety law and econ, fun stuff.
Yeah.
So
Crazy combination. We're glad that you all practically expose yourself to. I know it's a bit far off, but I hope that it has a lot of perspective which maybe are not always coming back in your job and therefore can be relevant and also interesting to hear from. Yeah.
So we'll kick it off with kind of a really high level set of topics, and then we'll kind of dive in and kind of unpack things little by little. But we thought it'd be kind of a neat idea, right, to kick things off with sort of an overview of where things are headed, because it's not really fun to study a thing unless you know why you're doing that thing, right? So the end result is what? What's the end game for autonomous cars? Where are we going? Now, obviously, we started with the proxy using electric vehicles. Obviously, Elon was kind enough to crunch the numbers for us, and if you extrapolate out, you consider the total number of global vehicles in the world, the replacement rate, or rather the production rate, I should say, of vehicles, then as a lower mathematical bound, then perhaps in 25 years we could replace all vehicles with electric. And again, we're using that as a proxy for autonomous, since virtually all electric cars tend to be autonomous and vice versa. That's obviously just a mathematical, impractical lower bound, but it kind of sets the framework for at least what's theoretically possible, obviously not what's going to happen. What you do end up with, though, is a conservative, hopeful estimate, which is driven both by the further development, but indeed, hopefully, the helpful legal mandates throughout the world to fast track autonomous vehicle development and deployment so that hopefully by the 2060s to 2080s, and that's kind of a pretty big delta, but hopefully by around that time, we should see the majority of human-driven vehicles off the road. So that's kind of a neat thing to look forward to. It's pretty tangible. But here are the various things we want to discuss. So Martin, you're going to tackle most of the safety issues. I'll give you a bit of background on the legal framework of things, because one of the recurring questions is always, well, what happens if such and such happens? You know, what if somebody jumps in front of an AV? What if this happens, this, that, the other? The paradox, which we'll discuss very briefly, and that's all. And you know, I just want to give you a bit of framework to show how the existing legal structure can be applied quite neatly to autonomous vehicles, because we're not talking about an entire new field of law. We're basically just kind of remixing first-year law school. So this then, of course, is the timeline for autonomous vehicles. Again, we're kind of extrapolating from everything we've heard here and there, and nobody really agrees with anybody on anything. So kind of use your imagination and take what you like, toss out what you don't agree with. But roughly speaking, this is probably what we're looking at, where level 4 deployment starts to occur sometime in the 2020s. We'll see some level 5 occurring maybe in the 2030s, widespread, say by the 2050s-ish. Intel and others have anticipated something like a $7 trillion industry for all autonomous vehicle stuff, however broadly that's defined. And then it's my genuine hope that indeed by the 2060s, we're going to start to see legal mandate, which will really kind of enable autonomous vehicles to really push human-driven cars off the road once and for all. Click. Click. Nope. There we go. So, Martin, talk numbers.
Yeah, all right. So in my capacity as like advising on traffic safety, I usually rather want to, you know, understand the grander scheme of things. And so like, how many deaths can we avoid? And I guess a lot of you are going to be familiar with the figures, like about 1.2 million deaths annually in the world. And then you have a higher number of serious injuries, 20 to 50 million. And then like minor injuries are going to go into hundreds of millions. And then like property damage are going to be even higher than that, right? So there's like a ranking of practically ratios of like something occurring, and 94% of them are caused by human error. It like depends on which country you're talking about. It could be 93 to 97, I think, but it doesn't really matter. What is actually interesting point, and I don't know, most of you are going to have seen this already, right? It's practically the chance of dying by a certain thing happening to you, and you're not going to be able to read it because it's probably very, very small, but I put those little arrows on there. So I practically, first one is like heart disease, cardiovascular disease practically kills the majority of people eventually. But actually the first unnatural cause of death is road accidents. That's our like little arrow here. So you can see that practically of dying of an unnatural circumstance, practically your body not failing, the first chance of that is being removed by traffic. So that's like, I mean, your guys are like practically going to remove one of their biggest causes of human death there is. And then I made another one, which is the second little thing, and that's the second unnatural cause of death. So you see how far you have to go down to practically get to the second most likely unnatural cause of death. So you see that traffic is not the most safest thing to be involved in at the current state. And actually, if you break this down to number, then 1 in 77 people are going to be a road fatality. We're not 77 people right now, but we're kind of closing in on that number. So if we would reach 77 people, then we would have one in the like in the room who's going to practically eventually die, statistically speaking. If you talk about injuries, then you're already at a 1 in 20 chance to suffer a severe life-changing injury during traffic. We're definitely more than 20 here. So practically one of us is going to be severely affected, statistically speaking, by such an occurrence, right? And that kind of demonstrates very, very clearly why we should consider this and why also even remote improvements on this issue. I mean, like we're always talking about like, you know, removing everybody, but like it just like 5% from a statistical economics perspective is like, would be beautiful. I mean, imagine how much 5% of 1.25 million is, you know? That brings me to another point of statistics. So a while back, I was working together with the OECD for the South Korean Ministry, or the Korean Ministry, on reducing the number of pedestrian fatalities in Korea. There are one of the unsafest countries in the OECD member countries to be walking, so don't really go there and like try to walk around that much next to the road. Something to do with how fast they industrialize and then practically build roads. And I think this is really relevant from the AV perspective, because we're always saying that 94% of accidents are caused by human error. That's very, very true. But not all of those people are sitting inside a motorized vehicle. And if you're looking at statistics nowadays, you will see that up to half of the people are not sitting inside a motorized vehicle. Last year was the first year where more people died on a bicycle accident in the Netherlands than actually being in a motorized vehicle. And we're going to see this also happening in other countries successively, right? Like in Germany, the number of cyclists is a bit lower, so it's not to that extreme. But when you're looking at who gets actually injured from cars, then it's a lot of people who are practically, you know, secondary. And then it's the question, okay, like if the car is not actually driving the bicycle or walking you, then how can you plan in for somebody just stepping out into the car lane and, you know, gone? What was that sound? No, I'll not do that again. So I think that if we're talking about, and we're hearing this in the last 5 years, we have heard this incredibly often, that this 94% number, I don't think that should be the target. The target should be somewhere, I don't know, something realistic, and we should practically tell ourselves that even 5% is like already an incredible gain. And even so we can get closer maybe to the 94%, there will be still an interaction with people which are not inside an autonomous vehicle. And from my perspective also, we should always ask ourselves, because there will be regulation there is already regulation trying to separate the vehicle from the interaction with the pedestrian, but we should really worry about ourselves if we want that. And I would strongly advise against this, because this has in the past not really reduced or not really increased the well-being of citizens. And I'm saying about this because this is exactly what the direction the Koreans went, right? So the Koreans have a high pace of practically building roads. They were like, oh, this is going to be fine. We're just going to make a highway, and then we're going to have this overpass, and everybody's obviously going to use that overpass. Turns out that all the old people couldn't walk the stairs. So what they're trying to cross a 3-lane highway, and obviously that's not going to go really well, right? Another point maybe which this analysis talks about, like in terms of safety regulation, is that often when the interaction takes place, it has something to do with the foreshadowing of the consequences, right? So like let's say you're on an intersection and one direction of the intersection has an 80 kilometer speed limit and the other one has a 60 kilometer speed limit. Your brain will see one side of the cars go and you will think that the speed limit of the other side should be roughly the same. You will practically walk into this thinking that you can make it across. Like this is actually quite a frequent occurrence actually. This is one of the main determinants of South Korean pedestrian fatalities, is practically not being able to foresee what the next likely event is going to be. And then maybe here already, because I'm going to come back to it later on, if you reduce the number of traffic accidents and therefore the fatalities, then what goes down is actually the cost of the accident. And what that means is that it goes down the cost of being in a car. And this will be not everybody perceives it as like, oh yeah, it's like so much cheaper nowadays to go because I'm not going to get killed. But it's practically everybody saying like, yeah, now that we have AVs or now that we have a better safety feature, it's become so much safer, and then I can send it. So like it's maybe not the thought of the actual percentage or practically, I don't know, the euro amount lost, but it is a higher feeling of safety. And once you feel more safe, you're going to use that car more. And that brings us back to an economic proposition, which is called the rebound effect, which says that practically once you have a lower price, you're going to have an increase in demand, and that increase in demand is going to put you almost back into the original position. So we're going to reduce traffic fatalities. That's going to make everybody think like, oh, it's so much cheaper, let's use it. Right? And then practically because you use it more often, you have higher risk exposure, practically bringing us, driving the accident numbers up again.
So this is the paradox of safety.
Yes, the paradox of safety, I think, is then it's related to that. And I'm going to give it back to Mark in one second. I have been not explaining it well. So like this is a study from Infras, Swiss organization, which were looking at a cost of traffic in Germany. Okay, and it's per kilometer basis. And then it's like practically motorized vehicles, airplanes, And then it's like according to the categories, and I know you can't read it, but this is motorized traffic, and like let's say like that the red one is the cost which comes through accidents. So you can see that given all costs inside a kilometer, you can see that a very high share of that is practically the possibility to being involved in an accident, right? So that the kilometer, the average cost practically of traveling kilometer would go substantially down if you could reduce the chances of having an accident. And that is also why the WHO, I want to say 2015, but maybe it's 2016, had a report where they were calculating on how much money is aggregate lost each year of practically having people suffer through accidents, and it's about 2%. So it's a huge share. If you think about that, economic practically growth is roughly around the 2%, right? You see to what extent practically this influences our productivity. But enough excursion, I'll hand back to you.
So obviously with all these safety issues, yeah, the law is a really big deal. Obviously all of what I'm talking about is from the American point of view. So let me just kind of reiterate what I said at the start, which is, look, the first thing is that we are not inventing a whole new body of law. We've got a really great framework, at least built on common law and everything else, which allows us to just adapt what we've got to existing scenarios. And what I mean by this is, so you get these questions, everybody says, what happens if an autonomous car, or a person jumps in front of an autonomous car? What happens in this trolley paradox scenario? What happens if somebody uses an autonomous vehicle to drive through a crowd of pedestrians or to deliver a bomb somewhere? I mean, these aren't new questions. We've been asking these questions since the beginning of time, the minute we had a wheel that could turn and carry something from A to B. So these aren't new questions. What is interesting, and I'll get to those specific examples in a moment just to prove my point, but to begin with, what is really interesting though is we are going to have some new definitions, right? So liability generally, and just sort of thinking out loud, so one can imagine that we're going to need at least 4 different types of, definitions, right? So you're going to hear me throughout the course of the evening referring a lot to the aviation world. I'm a hopeless aviation fanatic as well. And in aviation, we've had, we no longer use the terms pilot and co-pilot or even captain and first officer. Rather, we use the terminology, the PF and the PNF. So the pilot flying and the pilot not flying. And so it seems pretty logical then that when we have autonomous vehicles, we're going to end up with something rather like this. An owner-driver, an owner-non-driver, a non-owner driver, and the non-owner non-driver, which is of course the perfect passenger. And the reason why this matters is because, it sounds silly. Somebody's laughing here. I don't know why, but here's why it matters, right? Because everyone talks about this liability question, like, what happens if an autonomous car hits somebody or something? Well, I don't know. If they're not driving and they don't own the car, how can they be liable for anything? I mean, you're not liable as a passenger sitting in an airplane, right? So ultimately what's going to happen is we're just going to do what we do in aviation. We're going to go down through the entire chain of potential liability until we find the source. A great example of this that I love, and by the way, as an aside, this is why aviation is so incredibly safe. I've often said that an aircraft at cruising altitude is the safest place a human can be in the globe. On the globe, above the globe, whatever. And this is amazing because one of the cool metrics you've all heard, I'm sure, is the mean time till failure for something. Well, the mean time to failure for a twin engine aircraft, both engines failing, is so vanishingly small, you can't even get a meaningful number out of it. I mean, these things are essentially, for lack of a better word, over-engineered bits of perfection. It's incredible. Nevertheless, there was a British Airways crash several years ago at Heathrow. Some of you might remember this. The issue was that there was some frozen fuel delivery system. And the question, of course, was, what went wrong? Well, obviously, as they should have done, they first looked to the pilots. There was nothing wrong there, so they went through all the various systems. They even were able to trace the fuel back, not just to the airport where they filled up the plane, all the way back to the oil refinery itself that produced the fuel. I mean, that's just cool. Well, as it turns out, that wasn't the issue. There was a mechanical failure in the plane. That's not the point. What is the point is that we can learn a lot from aviation, and that's why these definitions matter a lot. So let's touch really briefly. I'm not going to give you a crash course in first-year law school, but look, these are really basic things in everyday life. negligence, intentional torts, criminal acts. Just running through them very quickly. I'm sure there's very familiar, similar things here in Germany and elsewhere besides. So for negligence, you just have to show that there was some duty that a reasonable person breached and that it actually caused the harm. There's a cool tangential thing called the emergency doctrine. If somebody did something out of an emergency situation, we say that that was probably okay. The textbook case is that a passenger in a taxi pulled a gun on the driver drove the car up onto the sidewalk into a brick wall. I think may have injured a pedestrian. That's not the point. The point was, would a reasonable person have done that sort of a thing? Would they have driven into a wall if a gun was pointed at their head? Well, yeah, the court said that's pretty reasonable. It's called a panic reaction. So you look at that, you look at intentional torts. Did somebody use an autonomous vehicle to drive through a group of people or to deliver a bomb? You look at, sorry, that's a criminal act rather. For intentional torts, whether you simply injured somebody or you trespassed on property, that's a fun one because it turns out, at least in American law, the intentional tort of trespass doesn't even require the knowledge that you were entering onto somebody else's property. Merely the intent to enter onto some property generally, and then that it happened to belong to somebody else, oh well, too bad for you. And so this raises the really interesting question, so you've got an autonomous vehicle, it's level 5. What happens if it turns around on somebody else's property? Well, who's liable? Is it the manufacturer of the vehicle? Is it the passenger who doesn't even own the car who programmed it? Is it the software company, the camera, the LiDAR company? These are the questions to be asking, not whether we can do it, but rather how to do it. Right, so that's kind of an example of the ways in which we can apply some of the frameworks. Okay, there's the trolley. Can we just get this out of the way very, very quickly, please? This doesn't need to keep getting brought up. We don't need to discuss this over and over again. There's 3. Does anybody not know the trolley paradox? Anybody? Don't be shy. Really? Oh, okay. This is annoying, but here we go. Okay, so very, very quickly, the trolley paradox is something like this. You've got a thing, a trolley, an autonomous car, whatever. It's driving along and suddenly there's a little kid crossing the road and there's a grandma and a grandpa crossing the road. So the car has, 3 options. It can either hit the little kid, it can hit grandma and grandpa, or it can drive off the cliff to avoid killing either grandpa or little kid and kill the occupants. Well, so that's the paradox, right? Because how is it supposed to decide? And here's why this is a completely useless discussion, although an admittedly awesome one inside of a philosophy classroom, which it is, but keep it in the classroom because, look, 3 things. First of all, has anybody ever here actually been driving along and thought to yourself, should I hit the grandma or the little kid? Like literally, have any of you ever actually been faced with this dilemma, ever? Okay, good. Number 2, look, if any person or vehicle, artificial, natural, or otherwise, is ever in this scenario, it's already screwed up. There's something already fundamentally broken earlier on in the development of the system, or of the person, I guess. This should never even occur. I get it. Everyone's thinking, yeah, Mark, but these are corner cases, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but there's a difference between like an academic corner and like a real world, some non-zero chance that this corner case could exist. My point is that this can't even exist. It's just not, even if it's possible, it's so highly improbable that it distracts from more important questions. Third and finally, as MIT demonstrated recently with a great study, we cannot, and as Martin so eloquently said on a podcast we did together, gosh, almost a year ago. Wow. We cannot, or at least we must not, program AI into a vehicle. The MIT study basically found that in the US, for example, people tend to prioritize little children over grandparents.
And it automatically becomes murder, right?
Yeah.
If you decide on who has to live or die, then you have quickly crossed the
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point, that it is basically murder. So again, at least in the US, it is not a defense. It's not a, you cannot argue that you killed somebody because somebody pointed a gun at your head and said, hey, you must kill this person or we will kill you. You can't make that argument. So in this case, yeah, that would literally be.
And to add to that, what do we do now? Do we go and learn at driving school who to kill?
This one is acceptable.
Why should we teach our software to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So okay, kind of wrapping that up all in a little package. So yeah, this is kind of neat. So in the interest of encouraging conversation here. So first of all, in general, how many of you are just in general in favor of AVs completely replacing human drivers one day? That's it? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
30%, I would say, maybe
Yeah.
40 for the audience.
So I'm guessing then that those of you who are in favor of AVs being mandated, how many of you think that AVs should, will be, or must be one day mandated? Okay. I mean, this is interesting. This is good.
It's very good. It's good.
Okay.
I should write that down, actually.
Which then leads to the next question is connectivity, right? So again, it's a whole nother discussion to get into. Over-the-air updates. You're all familiar with Tesla and how they do software updates. The only car company in the world that does this. With the same frequency and robustness and thoroughness and...
Not in that wide scope, but
Yeah.
too.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm sure about robustness.
Occasionally. From time to time. But then it's updated again the next hour, so you're okay. And this is a big question, right? Because let's throw out the other question then, which is how many of you are in favor of over-the-air updates generally, wireless connectivity generally? That's it?
Oh, much more.
Okay, that's better. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Although that's an interesting.
80%.
Yeah.
Interesting, yes.
All right, so this is kind of where we're going at with this, right? So to the point of safety that Martin discussed, my overarching high-level view, and this is strictly opinion, admittedly, but I really would like to share it. And for those of you who have heard the podcast, you frankly probably heard this before. At least speaking from the US point of view, and again, borrowing from what we've learned from aviation, we do eventually need an FAVA, literally a Federal Autonomous Vehicle Administration. So internationally, to complement the FAA, the Aviation Administration, you've got the IACO and the IATA. And we need a similar thing for AVs, right? I just mentioned that. And here's why, right? So today, we don't even have such basic guidelines and standardizations for things like how to define anything, the design, the technology, whether LiDAR, computer vision, or what have you, safety issues, privacy issues with respect to over-the-air updates, security generally, how to deploy these things, how to test them, traffic issues, taxes issues. And this really matters a lot because, okay, here's another aviation example. So when Airbus first deployed, and indeed when they were first testing their first aircraft, commercial aircraft, the Airbus A300, it was the first civil aircraft to use fly-by-wire, which was a military technology. And well, nobody knew whether it was sufficiently safe. There were no guidelines. Today, knows whether computer vision is good enough, like say LiDAR. There's no set standards. I mean, we have standards even for things like how far your headlights go, right? And so, well, in the absence of standards, finally, the powers that be said, well, look, let's just see if your Airbus is at least as safe as Boeing. Okay, well, that's certainly not a bad way to go, I suppose. You've got some status quo, which is Boeing. Let's go with that. But the point is, we don't have any of those. And I'm just sort of randomly tossing a bunch around for now because there's a lot of issues here. You can ask questions later if you like. Take traffic and taxes. You may have heard that BCG, World Economic Forum study that showed that, well, let me back up for a moment. So an autonomous future presupposes that you have three components, right? You've got autonomous vehicles that are electric and that are shared. You cannot have just two of those three components. Everything will break down, it'll just fail. And so then you start asking yourself the question, well, how do you make this work? Well, okay, one way is taxes, I suppose. Have an occupancy tax. Don't let autonomous cars drive around empty, right? And there is precedent for this. London has congestion charges. In the US, we have carpool lanes, which require that you have at least one or two passengers per car. So there's a lot of great precedent for all this stuff. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Terrible pun, but you get my point. So, okay, Martin, you should explain this beautiful slide you chose.
I should. It would be also interesting to think, like, I don't know, do you from your perspective see something, do you think it would simplify regulation towards autonomous vehicles, if you had some organization which would be practically supervising it, get the car, say like, yeah, it's fine, because I mean it takes a lot of like practically, it takes a lot of pressure from the industry, I could imagine, right? So I don't know. For me, it's very interesting as an economist to think of what would happen if you practically had something. Now, right now, we have like a TÜV or something like that in Germany, you know, but it's a very different organization in itself. It's interesting if it would practically speed up development of the new technology and reduce costs. But anyway, so if we go forward into this AV future, or since we're going forward into this AV future, there's maybe 5 points which we want to discuss with you, but we don't actually have personally the answers. So those are open questions in a sense. The first one is maybe one of the understandable ones, but really, really out there. It's the use of AI in autonomous vehicles, right? Like machine learning, whatever. And what are the implications then for that car? Because all of a sudden, practically, it's not something you fully programmed, and so practically it can do anything with you, essentially, if the coding is not correct. And then that in combination, so that practically introduces one risk pool, which is the question, do we actually want that, or do we not want that? And the second one is associated, not fully, is to what extent do we want to be, since 80% of you agree with over-the-air updates, to what extent are we afraid that practically cars are used adversely against certain people who are using them, either a nation state or a smaller region or whatever. I mean, especially since we are already in a time frame where people are using technology to hurt other people. And I put a picture of Fate of the Furious. I think it's the only movie I know where cars are weaponized. And yes, I don't know who's seen the movie. And for me, that beckons the question, if it is really true that you can actually have a steer an entire fleet, then from a regulator's perspective, it becomes a question if the car, like right now, streets are critical infrastructure and therefore remains in the domain of the state, right? As do water appliances and therefore and energy. And then you have special regulation. Once you have a car fleet which you control as a single entity, let's say the car manufacturer or the fleet provider or the service provider, and let's say that transportation is one of the most crucial aspects of everybody's life, then clearly, as a government who you know that this can be influenced, it becomes critical infrastructure, and then clearly there is regulation which is going to follow to that. It's my personal opinion, I don't know if you share this with me. And once you also bundle those little cars up into a fleet which you control, then what you do is practically you pool risks, right? Because before everybody could do what they wanted and they had all their little risk themselves, and if you pool a risk, then it becomes a question of insurance or who's going to pay in the end if you really mess this one up. And there was a KPMG study in 2015 or something like that among insurers, which asked insurance providers to what extent they felt prepared for AVs. And 68, so almost 70% responded that they had no budget for such a discussion. 74% said they were not ready. And 84%, but on the other hand, 84% of them thought it would have a significant impact on their revenue stream.
Which is weird.
Yeah, which is like, we don't have money. You know? Okay.
Speaking of which, though, we should ask that question as well. Who thinks that AVs are going to destroy the insurance industry?
Or destroy, or at least alter it substantially? Nobody.
Nope. Nobody thinks AVs will have any impact on the insurance industry. Okay, good.
Okay.
Who do you think, and how many think it'll harm the insurance industry?
I mean, harm is also no.
Yeah. So, yeah, because we've talked about this a lot, obviously, and it sounds like many of you have thought about it. So, at least the general idea that I have certainly is that it's actually going to, if insurance companies do it right, it's going to be great. Because you're basically shifting the burden to much deeper pockets. If you don't have to deal with pesky humans, just a bunch of big, rich companies, this is really great for the insurance industries. An analogy for this is, of course, same thing with certain businesses, right? So a lot of people ask what's going to happen to sort of freeway side motels or hotels. So in the US, we have a chain called Motel 6. They're really awful, but they are cheap, they work, they have a bed-ish. And so the idea is that, look, these Motel 6s could eventually just sort of white label their own AV pod cars and kind of evolve with the times. Instead of staying at a stationary box on the side of the road, you get to stay in a box with wheels and continue on to your destination. Lufthansa does this with their shuttle buses. I know because my wife and I took it here to Munich from the airport. So this is not really, this doesn't require a huge leap of imagination.
You were sleeping on a shuttle bus?
No, it was 20 minutes from the airport.
So profitability goes up if like chance of like failure goes down from the insurance perspective. So that far we know. So we know that actually their profitability go up, but obviously they're forced to practically negotiate with much larger partners, right? And also from the car manufacturing side, I mean, which some of you or most of you are in, it becomes the question of why don't I provide the insurance? If I have already the statistical data on how how likely my car is failing, I mean, that's the relevant information you need to make it your own business. And if you're guaranteeing anyway that this car is going to arrive safely, which I mean Tesla is doing by paying out everybody who gets injured by one, then why wouldn't you just like practically say like it's one service? Why wouldn't you just come and say like, you get into my car, you're fully insured during the entire trip of the travel? If you take such a huge risk as a provider, then you're kind of moving into the area of, I guess, which the airline industry is in, right? Then you're going into the area of Boeing, and then like unforeseen events might practically have implications which might actually, you know, threaten the survivability of your firm, right? Especially if you can be in the past, from the past, be sued now into the future of a lot of cases which you have been trying to hide. Usually that's how it goes. And then another example which comes from the car industry, and I guess most of you remember the Takata incident, right? I mean, so you have a number of people who are providing you, and I mean, you were showing this beautifully earlier. You have so many like people who are involved into the same kind of architecture, delivering parts to each other, and arguably one could say that an AV car is a more complex car than a regular car, right? And if you have this, then, I mean, who is ultimately taking the responsibility to themselves and saying like, okay, no, that just was a component which failed, no, yeah, that's the result, right? And then, I mean, you remember what happened to Takata, they practically went bankrupt, and then it's obviously the next in line who is going to take this responsibility. So moving forward, practically, do you assume a lot more responsibility as a car manufacturer? And there comes the question then, do you go the way which you usually would? Do you go reinsure yourself? Practically, do you take out big insurances, go to a reinsurer and try to practically pool that risk? As an economist, I would think probably. But I think it's a very, very interesting question. Like Mark and me think it's a very interesting question. Now those three are all together. So there's three more practically. The one is the safety paradox, that what we discussed earlier already somewhat, but it's not the same safety paradox, it's a secondary one, right? Earlier we had the idea that there would be a rebound in demand which would increase the number of people getting hurt again because there's just more AVs driving around, there's more use. This safety paradox sees it more from the other side of the person interacting with the car, and it is practically, let's say you are a cyclist and you know that 60% or 70% of the cars are AVs and you know that they're programmed to stop, right? Then you're going to start doing stuff, you're going to just pull in front of it because you know it's going to stop, right? So we as humans, we're going to start adopting our behavior towards the much more safer car.
Actually, I should add to that. So in California, we have a law that I think is pretty flawed, where pedestrians have universal right-of-way. No matter what happens, the pedestrian is not at fault. And so what this ends up, the secondary effect of this, and I'm not making this stuff up, is how many times you'll see like a parent pushing their baby stroller on their AirPods, looking down, not looking at the cars going by. I'm not joking, this happens every day, and nobody looks. And I mean, I don't know, I was raised, you know, like make eye contact with the driver, don't cross until you actually see the whites of their eyes. And nobody does this anymore. So to your point though, yeah, that's we can kind of imagine that sort of a future. It's a weird question.
No, it is. And we know this, I mean, this has been like, it's almost like a universal law. It always is true, right? We have continuously as a species throughout time adopted our behavior towards the risk we are facing. If you think about like skiing, for example, the better the technology became, the crazier we went on them. So
well, this is why the safest car in the world would have no seatbelts, no airbag, just a metal spike in the middle. That was one of my first.
What is the spike for? I was wondering.
Well, because if you hit the brakes and you crash, it'll go right through your skull. going to drive very, very safely. No, our econ professor at UCLA, that was one of his first lessons to us. I don't remember what the lesson was, but the story stuck. And we know this is true, actually. Who's driven a Tesla on autopilot? Who's driven a Tesla with autopilot? One person. Really? Only one person here. Okay, so I wonder if you experience... That's true. That's true. Okay.
They still advertise it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, they would. Well, okay, so here's the point, though, is that having tried it many times late at night, an hour's drive, it's midnight, you get sleepy, and it's pretty alarming because you realize you could very easily fall asleep just because it's that good until it isn't. But it is really good, and it's weird, right? Because in a regular car, you're probably going to be more, I don't know, less like, yeah, I guess like it or not, you are less attentive. Are you inattentive? No, but you are certainly less attentive. But in a regular car, yeah, you're much more attentive and you're therefore less likely to sleep. The ironic thing is, in a regular car though, if you do fall asleep, you're dead, game over. Like, that's just how it is. But in a Tesla, you may actually survive. And indeed, people around you may survive as well. So it's a very weird kind of, I don't even know what word to use. It's a weird...
Indeterminate state, maybe?
That, yes.
It's the Schrödinger's cat, but like inside a Tesla.
Yeah.
Good point. And that, I guess, brings us also already to the fourth point, that since we adjust our behavior, and since you don't, as a car provider or as the regulator, want people to go completely nuts in their behavior, you kind of have to have some sort of supervision of what the person does, right? You want to practically say it was the pedestrian's fault who stepped right in front of the highway, in front of that AV and got hit eventually. And the only way of proving that is going to be practically with recording data and practically recording a lot of data. And this might not be as much of a problem in California, but you know that it is a huge problem in Germany, right? So it practically violates a lot of the laws which we have passed in the, like, so practically there's a strong, divergence about what you would want to have for a safe operation and what you can potentially do.
So dash cams are illegal then?
I think so. I don't know, are they legal?
Not illegal, but you may not use it.
So there's no public lack of privacy exception rule then?
No. Even the wall of cameras earlier mentioned would be very doubtful. Which you mentioned, that would be already like gray area. And then we come back to the same point which we made earlier. Once cars are that safe, how long let's say that cars eventually in 2040s, 2050s, 2060s, AVs are that safe, how long can you withhold making them actually mandatory? Right? Because freedom only goes so far, but once you start inflicting pain on other people, then as a government, usually that's exactly the step where you go in and you practically make it illegal to practically do something so unsafe. And so you can also clearly also see why this would be very, very attractive as a government to make it mandatory at a certain point.
Also, cars are a bit different to anything else in the world, right? There's a very deep-rooted cultural thing that we have with cars.
Yeah.
Different countries in different ways, but there is that link. Now, never mind the fact that once you have an autonomous car, purely autonomous, I think that emotional bond will be somewhat severed.
But the question, Apple?
Huh?
Even if it's an Apple?
Probably not if it's an Apple. That's true. But I think the question becomes: how do you actually, how do we compel people to make that change? And when you think about it, what has been the biggest driver, the biggest motivator of cultural change through history? Like what has pushed the biggest, most profound social changes through history?
War?
Okay, besides war, something a little bit more benign, but yes. Film, movies, pop culture, right? So it goes from smoking is cool to smoking is not cool. James Bond no longer gets drunk through his movies. I mean, movies have a really profound change on society. It sounds silly to say it, but it's really quite true, actually. And more broadly speaking, well, social media generally. So when you think of it that way, I think, I used to joke that James Bond will eventually have an electric car, and of course that's happening, and how much you want to bet that electric car will be autonomous, right? And so I think Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, I think a lot of this phase shift, which will also help, I guess, motivate regulatory change and to mandate AVs, will actually come with a big social component. People are going to need to push for this, and the rest will follow.
I like it. The question slide, do you want to do that one?
Well, this is for you guys. This is for everybody here. So, yeah, so I mean, you're all on the spot then, really. I mean, these are some questions that we just thought at a high level are worth kind of opening up to the audience, really. Is this the last slide then? Is it? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. All right, so yeah, so, you know, at a high level, we can kind of kick things off like this if we have some time for discussion, which we have some time, right?
How much time do we have?
5 minutes-ish.
Okay.
But alternatively, if anybody has any direct questions you want to ask, just throw them our way. But yeah, issues of clarity, regulation, safety, urban planning, mobility, climate crisis.
Yeah, I guess the point of this slide is also to say that while we're discussing safety and security, then going back to Mark's famous statement, we should never underestimate the tremendous changes that autonomous vehicles are going to hold for the way we live, right? So like transportation is always an underthought component, but if you think about like another driver of like a change in human society was clearly mobility, right? Like the speed of which you can transport people and goods is practically probably one of the determinants of economic growth and also of societal development. And practically our capacity to connect and then exchange idea is practically the underlying crucial determinant of how quickly we can develop as a species.
Yeah, and speaking of which, we didn't even touch on the really big topics of economics, things like, for instance, well, two in particular, right? So one of them is, what happens to commercial truck drivers and taxi drivers? I mean, this is so commonly discussed, it's almost become a throwaway thing. Like, oh, what about these people? But like everyone says it, but nobody comes up with a solution. Similarly, I had a really great guest on the podcast. He has a real estate firm in San Diego. And I asked him this big question, which is, what's going to happen to the price of housing in the suburbs? And it seems that the default reaction seems to be what you suggested earlier today when we were talking, which is, how did you put it? That the suburbs will actually go down in price, right? Because...
That really depends on the regulation.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, that was you we were talking. Sorry.
No, I was wondering like.
Still jet lagged. But yeah, we were talking about this earlier, right? And the idea was that they'll go down in price. And my belief is actually rather the opposite. They're going to up in price because now there's no downside to living in the suburbs because the very concept of commuting won't even be a thing anymore. It's not going to be a hassle. It won't be a problem. So suddenly, if suburbs go up in price, where will be the more affordable places to live?
How far is the suburb out? I think that's the question.
Well, yeah, but the interesting thing is that depending on how you define either an autonomous car or even a room to your home, which, depending on your definition, that an autonomous car basically would be, you're basically blurring the line between your bedroom and the, right? So it just raises this interesting question of what's it going to do all these economic issues.
Yeah, that's very good. Shall we have a brief discussion all together?
Any questions? Or
yes, questions?
If we imagine the case of coincidental security event, for instance, coincidental malware, whatever that means, or unintentional jamming of a radar.
Okay. Unintentional or intentional?
Unintentional jamming of a radar. Would you recommend this? I think it's a question to Mark. Would you recommend to consider this, as the engineers say, a reasonable, foreseeable misuse?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, that is the usual legal standard, right? It has to be a reasonable and foreseeable thing, or I should say it should be a foreseeable thing, right? So when you talk about negligence, generally you need to have both actual cause and proximate cause. So the thing had to have actually caused the harm, but also it must be the case that it foreseeably caused the harm. So if you hit a golf ball and it bounces off a tree, off somebody's car, into somebody's window, that's not so foreseeable. So to your point, yeah, if indeed, at the end of the day, the question is also the state of the art of the technology. So if it's understood, this is that standard, this is that state of the art, and if in fact those standards were upheld, then that's a pretty good argument in defense for what may have occurred. But this is why, again, it's so important to have those standards in the first place. I'm thinking from the look I didn't answer your question.
It seems that there should be some additional discussion. I'm not sure about this. I had different opinions on this. It's a discussion among lawyers and engineers and standardization committees. I think it's very complicated.
But if you just only installed one component, then isn't it already foreseeable that practically one component might easily fail, and therefore you practically had the foreseeable event? I mean, if you have multiple safety components which work on different technologies and one fails, then, I mean, if you install a safety, like the same with the airline industry, if the airline industry would only have one system and no backup system, then like, I mean, like we would definitely assume that eventually this will fail and then eventually this will quickly cause some harm. So I guess wouldn't you already exclude this possibility by having two independent systems which doing the safety?
Well, in a single case, this might be excluded, but it would change the probability of being harmed. And that's an important point, I think. Mm. Not necessarily having fatals. Of course, there should be some redundancy in place. Yeah.
But even airlines didn't have these kinds of redundant systems until they were mandated to.
Really?
I mean, once upon a time, we didn't have any systems. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, virtually, so tragically, most every safety element of aircraft, there was an expression I read, there's actually a phrase, a morbid way of describing this, I forget what it is, but basically, people died to produce these mandates in aviation.
So was automotive safety.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Seatbelts, everything, yeah, exactly. I mean, and at the end of the day, look, things are going to go wrong. People are going to die. I have a pretty unpopular opinion which says, okay, if some autonomous cars kill some people, which they will, as long as on net we're saving way more people. I mean, that sounds really callous, but it's the best that we can do.
No.
I have one. Is there a lobby, regardless of the form and shape, that is against automated driving?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I don't know if they're explicitly.
I don't know any.
So, do any of you know Alex Roy by any chance? He did the famous cannonball run in his M5 years ago. Anyway, he started a group, something in, I can't remember the name of it, you can Google it, but something about in favor of human drivers. That said, he's very much for autonomous vehicles also. In fact, he's with Ford's Argo AI. My point being that I don't think they're mutually exclusive things, and I think this is a really important distinction. So to answer your question directly, I'm not familiar with any organization explicitly pushing against AVs. No, I'm not. That said, I think a world in which both exist is totally, it sounds silly to say it, but look, people can still go horseback riding for sports. I love cars, I love driving on racetracks. My dad used to race. I will always want to take a car to a racetrack. I can't wait to one day go to the Nürburgring. But they don't belong on public roads, and that's the difference.
Any other questions?
Oh, there's one.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Do you think democracy is a good system for
What, to mandate AVs?
Definitely the best.
Yeah.
But
Ish.
for this autonomous driving cars, is it not better to have a system like the Chinese have?
You literally actually took the words out of my mouth. I mean, it seems that there might be an argument, you know this better than I do, it seems there might be an argument to be made that there is a population threshold above which typical democracy may have some failings. I don't know.
I don't
Yeah, it's a
think
good question.
There's no reason to believe that the democracy wouldn't be able to like handle an AV future.
Yes.
In my opinion. Like democracy, I mean, like practically lets you go in a really wrong direction for quite some time, but always swings back. Whereas if you have the other system, you just keep on going. You know, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So like you could develop an AV which is terrible in the end, and you're practically in a non-democratic way. You're just gonna keep on rolling with that.
To really, I don't know how to say What is the difference between
yeah.
our democracy and Czech? One is explicit. There you say you can't have more than one car. Here we'll say if you have more than one car, you'll pay more taxes.
Yeah.
One is implicit, the other is explicit.
I guess the problem is more the thing for the risk or the lobby. If there is the potential risk of the full risk, and let's see the discussion about who am I here in Germany or even in USA. It's the same situation. There is much risk from one company. And now they say, we don't use it.
Actually, I think
That's a really good argument.
It is. I'm going to let you run with this because I think I may have misunderstood you then. I thought the question was whether a government generally is capable of pushing the mandate for AVs on its own in a democracy or without it. But go for it.
Right. So like I don't know if that that probably doesn't answer your question, but I think that points to a very another outcome which as a car manufacturer might be very interesting. You know, that if you provide critical infrastructure, that it gives you the reason to be excluded from certain markets. Mm-hmm. No. But what were you going to say? You probably had a better...
No, that was good. I'll go with that.
All right, good. Yeah. Perfect.
I agree with this thought of taking this automated tries to save lives, but from an economy perspective, the communication of the transportation is one of the major source of employment for n number of people in terms of production, in terms of commutation, in terms of getting there. The moment you automate this part, where will that huge chunk of people do for a livelihood? Where are we going trying to fit them into the world?
I mean, so that was the point we raised earlier, right? The truck drivers, the London cabbies. Yeah, I mean, my easy throwaway answer is that we are going to have an interim phase, a transition from human-driven to fully autonomous. So level 4, oh, and by the way, we never did mention this, did we? Level 4 is where things are going to be for quite some time. I'll make this super quick. I think people should stop talking about and writing about and marketing and advertising about level 5. All that matters is to get level 4 on the road and treat it as the virtual train that it is. And level 4, don't forget, still requires a human backup driver. So my expectation is we're going to see a transition where the actual full-time drivers, they're still going to keep their jobs. They're just going to be in the driver's seat, mostly not driving except when necessary. So I think we've got some time, call it a couple decades, okay, 10 to 20 years, and then it'll become more of an issue. But the hope is that during that transition period, yeah, maybe it's not the first time in history that people have lost jobs due to technology. I'm not saying that makes it okay. I'm just saying that this is not a novel scenario. It's different in scope and in magnitude and indeed perhaps even in time frame, but this has happened before. And I think that transition will help make it easier.
To add to that, AV is only one aspect of that, truck drivers and taxi drivers. AI is going to affect many other jobs that we're not even thinking about. Doctors, lawyers, and many other things. I mean, even our job, we create programs, right? We write programs, and we create software to generate code. So we're going to eliminate all this. And Elon Musk, Warren Buffett already talked about universal basic income. That could be one way. Probably that's the only way. The other way is, like Mark mentioned, this is a novel scenario. The society makes a transition. I mean, we can think about the industrial age, right? Industrialization. And that could be one way.
If you look at the industrialization and how long people would spend on average in school, and if you look now how long people spend on average in school, you see that practically as a society we have perfectly adapted to a higher level of productivity and practically requiring less job inputs, right? So practically we're going into the future, and times people are going to spend at university or in training institutions are going to increase in the terms of percentage of their lifespan. But the other times which they actually work, they're going to be highly productive using AI technology. So it's just practically a change of the labor market and what you do. And then, I mean, there was back 100 years, 150 years ago, there was some economists which were writing about like the idea of like finally getting rid of all those shitty jobs, not having to do them anymore. And like practically we kind of lost this goal somewhere along the way. Now everybody's still thinking like if that person is not employed, that's not a good thing. But actually originally we invented all that technology to practically do have more free time, right? So if we take more free time, we use a lot of that free time to practically train ourselves and use it in a much more beneficial way. Absolutely. I mean, that's an excellent outcome.
So I totally agree with that. In my opinion, the truck driver will have more time and will be able to use his creativity and his ability even more.
Yeah.
AI is just going to enhance human race. It's not going to put us in problem. This is my personal opinion.
So actually I have to disagree a little bit, because like what you explained so far is of course like people, I would say like here in this room, who have the ability to learn, their prosperity grew a lot. But a lot of people on the other side, so we have always the split in the last years, over the last years and decades, where one side is like prosperity growing really fast, and on the other side it isn't, because they didn't have the access to education. And I think it will, like with AI and with even with AVs, we will even increase the split. Yeah.
This might easily be the case, but I think if you are right, then the regulation failed at another point. The question on the redistribution, educational access, quality of education, I mean, those are things which are usually done by government organizations which are not directly involved in transportation. It is true that if you screw those ones up, then AI and AVs together in combination can be terrible instruments, because they practically only certain amounts of people have access to it, which will empower them to be even more wealthy. That's very true. It can be an instrument. But I think the tool, we can't blame the tool there at that point. It's just more of a society that we weren't able to progress with the tools we created, right? I mean, we have constantly proven that we're like incapable of that, but like every once in a while we catch up and implement a new rule, which is good. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that it's not always technology driven is doing everything better. So we also have to change our society in some ways, how we're living. And yes, that's the only
I agree with you. Have anybody here read the book from Hans Rosling, Factfulness? If you have read the book Factfulness, then you'll know how much we have actually progressed in the last few decades, and we oftentimes understate or understatement, saying that we haven't really progressed, and this is vast majority is due to technology. I agree with you, technology is not always good, but vast majority that we have progressed is due to technology.
Yeah, also, what's the alternative? Not to pursue? I mean, things are going to go wrong inevitably. They always have, they always will.
That's it.
So we deal with it as we
AI will happen anyway.
Yeah.
AV will happen anyway. Once it's out there, it's going to happen.
The important thing is just to keep them on our side.
Right.
As long as we do that, all will be well in the world eventually. And if we don't, it will not be. Yeah. I think that's a wrap.
So maybe one last question, then we'll take a break.
All right.
If there is any. Yes.
Oh, nice.
Hit it.
just one question.
So who do you think should or is driving autonomous driving at all? So you said it could be reducing casualties, which would be a general thing that everybody might want as a society. Then there could be the OEMs, which want to make more money. It could be it could be the insurance companies. Who's really driving and wanting more and faster autonomous driving so far?
That's a good question.
I'll give this to you.
I just want to throw one comment out. I always like to say, at least from the safety point of view, sorry, I'm hijacking your topic here, but from a safety point of view, I do like to point out, as intentionally morbidly as I can, that when you think of the numbers as just, well, numbers, it doesn't mean very much to a lot of people. But I like to say that, in the US, those numbers translate to a 9/11 tragedy of deaths every single month. Like, if this were any other pursuit in life, it would have been rendered illegal forever ago, before it was like ever even allowed in the first place. So there is the safety, there's also just the general, ever-going surge of innovation and technology generally. Look, this technology finds its roots in the 1990s. And it's really just evolutions of technologies we've been having for decades, right? So cruise control became adaptive cruise control, and blind spot assist became lane keep assist, and so on and so forth. These are just natural evolutions. I think the question of whether or what is pushing them forward, I think it's an interesting one, but I wonder whether it's
definitely safety, but besides safety, it's as you mentioned, is a $7 trillion industry.
Well, yeah, that's it.
And if you think about during the IPO of Uber, their valuation was $82 billion, and 80% of Uber revenue goes to paying those drivers. Imagine Uber could eliminate those drivers overnight. Their market cap would 5x, 10x overnight. So that is one of the motivation, I think.
Also, let's not only think of this in terms of luxuries. This isn't just like a nice to have thing. Yeah. For many, many people in the world, this is going to, I can't think of a stronger word than transform their lives. This is going to completely enable humans to do things they were never able to do before. People who are disabled or otherwise unfit or unable to drive, people who can't or aren't, for whatever reason, right? This is going to completely just enable entire new chunks of society to do things they were never able to do. Somebody once said that you take a sufficiently advanced form of technology and you show it to somebody, it appears like magic. This really is that special. So here's to magic.
This is the magic.
Nice.
All right, thank you so much, and we'll have a thanks, guys.